Next up, we have Eugene. Hey, Eugene, how's it going?
Going well. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for asking. So we got a preview of a name called Scurf. I see today we're talking about Smart Contract Research Forum. Is Scurf the acronym?
Yes, yeah, and we now much prefer Scurf because we realize when we actively introduce ourselves as the Smart Contract Research Forum, people's first question is, "So, what part of smart contracts in your research?" And we're like, "Well, we do a lot more than that." And yeah, so it starts getting confusing real quick. And yeah, so we're overall Web3 focused, and we love going with Scurf.
Awesome. Well, I'm definitely excited to hear more about the Scurf. Can you please introduce yourselves and then feel free to hop into your presentation?
Perfect. Yeah, thank you. So, hi everyone. Pleasure to be here and excited to get to be part of MetaFest. My name is Eugene Leventhal. I'm the head of operations and outreach at the Smart Contract Research Forum, or SCURF, as we were just saying. We're a grant-funded org, and I'll tell you all about that. My own personal background is I did finance and psychology undergrad, spent 7 years in the corporate world around professional services for the finance industry. Took me 7 years to realize that's not my cup of tea. And then I ended up transitioning back to go to grad school. And in 2016 was when I went down the Bitcoin blockchain rabbit hole. And the part that got me most excited was specifically governance and how can you use DAOs as a ways of getting people together and coordinated. This was around the time the DAO was happening. And myself and a few other folks, we worked on a project called EduDAO, not the one that launched last year, but it was a different EduDAO that started in 2016. And so, yeah, that was a really fun trying to work on a DAO project back then. Very different time than where we're at now. But yeah, if anyone ever wants to chat about any of that, more than happy to. But I know the goal of today's presentation is to run through a little bit about SCURF and specifically this concept of decentralized research centers, which is something that is getting me really excited at the moment from the perspective of really thinking about how can we use Web3 and just the thinking and ethos around decentralization to recreate different kinds of knowledge ecosystems? Or how do we bring together all of the relevant networks to have really focused areas of impact? So hopefully my slides are showing, and I'm just going to keep talking unless someone jumps in and tell me they're not. Perfect.
You're good.
Yep, they're up. Great. Cool. So yeah, today I'll talk a little bit about SCURF and impact networks, talk about kind of research networks and what I'm calling knowledge ecosystems, and then I'll give some concrete examples around that. So at a very high level, SCURF's mission is to advance research focusing on the Web3 space. And what that overall entails is trying to think through what are all the ways that we could bring together researchers, which you'll see a lot of the time gets tossed around as academia here, and builders or industry. And there are some gray areas in between. So I think we're going to transition away from just purely academia and industry to more of the researcher builder model. But pretty much how can we bring together this ecosystem of people producing research who want to get it amplified, who want to get access to industry and be able to collaborate more with people who are turning, research problems into engineering problems? And how do we create tighter feedback loops between the people generating knowledge, interacting with it, trying to build it, and then wanting to go research more components around it? So for us, the starting point at SCURF was research discoverability, or the idea of there is a large body of work that already exists in terms of, the collective knowledge of research that might be out there broadly. And then if you think about the amount that actually gets applied by people who are dealing with engineering problems, who have, funding pressures, who have all kinds of different aspects in the reality of their environment, your average CTO at a DeFi or any Web3 regen, pick an area, but any Web3 topic area, we theoretically should all be reading a lot more of the research that comes out, but there's only so many hours in a day. So how can we use our forum and research summary grants, which is grants where we incentivize people to write about their research on our forum? How can we use that as a structure to help with research discoverability for the space, to make it more accessible for people to understand what's your actual point in this 60-page dense academic paper on cryptography or governance or scaling or security or whatever other core research domain area? And so when thinking about that element of research discoverability, right, there's the how do we capture knowledge, and knowledge here really being how do we capture research discussions in writing and find ways to disseminate it? Because there's the element of pure amplification. So someone just put a great idea out there, and how do we get that idea to more people? But again, as I was just mentioning with things like research summary grants, it's, well, how do we take a 60-page paper and incentivize someone to create a 4-page, more digestible overview of that paper and use our forum as a way of disseminating it? And so on this slide, I kind of just break out some thinking of how do we kind of capture some of the research content that's already out there, and what are the ways that we're trying to intentionally disseminate it. So on the capture side, as mentioned, we have research summary grants. We have direct, this is a grant that we're starting, these two we're starting to grow more. Research support is us directly funding research, because we mostly, again, are focused on research discoverability. How do we just use our forum as this moderated place for long tail discussion around research, and to build a healthy, thriving community around that? But now we're actually starting to, I want to say we funded in the 10 to 15 range in terms of overall projects so far. So this is still on the early days side for us, but still just exciting to get to support some great researchers in the space, especially independent researchers. So not just structured academic teams, but how do we actually support independent researchers as well? And then thinking through, right, there are a lot of existing networks around research. How do we bring them together, add all the value that we can? And then on the dissemination side, we have our forum, we have our GitHub, we have our Discord and community where we actually try to engage more discussion around. We have regular community calls where next week, say, we're actually going to have David Ehrlichman, who's the author of Impact Networks, but he's going to be presenting, and we're specifically going to be talking about the idea of impact networks in the context of SCRF and what we're trying to do, which is actually something I'll bring up a little more today, because the way that David frames the idea of impact networks really helps crystallize a lot of what we were trying to figure out, how we want to go about things. And we're still in the process of kind of framing around that. And so SCRF in general kind of has a couple different buckets to it. We have our content. So if you go to smartcontractresearch.org, that's kind of that's our forum, right? I'm sure everyone here will recognize it's just a discourse instance. But we have what hits our forum. We have a team of moderators. We have our community. We have our onboarding structure. We have the actual humans around the content in the forum, and how do we get them engaging and collaborating? And also this team is overseeing, making sure that whatever's hitting the forum is appropriate from a research perspective, right? If we just have someone hop in and start shilling their project, we're just going to take that down, because our focus is not markets, not prices, etc. Our focus is research. So we want to always make sure that whatever topics are being covered does have that angle. And so engagement is all about, as the name implies, engaging with it, building community around it. How do you get those long tail discussions going from the one-time posts on the forum? How do we let the world outside of SCRF via our discovery function hear about what's going on? How do we push ideas out into the world about what's happening at SCRF? Outreach is then trying to pull in strategic partnerships and organize events and focused convenings. And operations is sort of the foundation or layer or wrapper around all of that, making it possible. And so the way I think about SCRF very much is that we are trying to build this sort of single layer of activity, community, funding opportunity, research discussion, et cetera, across any Web3 domain. So whether you're interested in cryptography and want to talk to governance people, or go into your domain, or whatever version of just being able to interact around research, we very much want the SCRF forum and community to be able to provide that kind of value to researchers. And we see our forum as kind of a connective thread between these different topics potentially. And I'll add a little more about this as we go, but the idea of SCRF is not just saying, hey, researchers, be aware of each other's stuff, right? We're trying to add in much more nuance. What is the community layer? What kind of media and advocacy might need to be in place? Are there educational pathways? How do we coordinate funding? All of these elements. So our starting point has been this kind of layer across research areas, and really trying to expand from there now. So I wanted to take a quick detour on the impact network side. And I'm sure everyone here has just heard of, general ideas of networks and, interconnected groups or systems. And, these networks can kind of exist on obviously the biological level. Humans generally naturally organized in some kind of network, right? If it's all about coordination happens between parties. The set of parties is a network, right? Groups that constantly bring themselves into focused or extended groups of people that can be argued to be networks. But those aren't the only ones, right? We have technical networks that are built and different kinds of social and biological networks that can be explored. But given the limited time today, we won't go in too much of a tangent there. But this is a quote from David's book, Impact Network. If you haven't read it yet, I highly recommend it. I think it is an awesome book. Please feel free to join our community call next week. Feel free to DM me on Discord or Twitter if you want to learn more information about it, and we'll generally be tweeting about it. But the punchline here is that the way David defines and talks about impact networks, it's this sort of mix of community and organization. How do you have the operational efficiency of an organization with the heart and soul of a community? Right. And I'm not going to read the quote, y'all can read it. But right, how do we combine these factors from each side? How do we use the best of both worlds, so to say, while recognizing, especially in this world of decentralization, I know a lot of folks are in the DAO space and playing around and contributing to a ton of DAOs, right? How do we actually use this mode of decentralization while adding some kind of element of operational efficiency and intentional community to really maximize the kind of productive outputs that we can collectively have? And as we kind of go through this presentation, I think we just mentioned that definition of impact networks, but I also think it's important to point out that for networks, right, different kind of networks are going to be effective at different kind of scales. So it's not to say that, hey, a research network inherently must bring together certain type of parties or be of a certain size. That's just not how it works. So the effective scale size of the network will be variable, and it's definitely not a fixed thing. And the other thing, right, and when I say a research network, I don't mean to imply that there is a single ubiquitous network of all of the research people in a single domain. We're really talking a lot about networks of networks here. So the whole idea of a decentralized research center is to try to create very focused impact networks, or a series of impact networks potentially. And that's part of what I actually want to discuss with David. But to pretty much bring together all of the relevant networks that you need to form a knowledge ecosystem. What is a knowledge ecosystem, you ask? It consists of 4 layers as I'm defining it. And I really don't like the naming of intellectual layer, but I don't know what else to call it yet. If you have ideas, please let me know. But you have the intellectual layer of networks, community layer of networks, operational, and funding. And to just visualize that, right? So you have these 4 kind of layers that are brought together by a single culture that is either emergent or intentional, and realistically a little bit of both probably. So let's dig into what these actually mean in a little more detail. Right. So the intellectual layer, as I'm pointing it out here, I'm defining that as any of the relevant research networks, any of the review networks, and any of the publication networks. Right. And you can see this is kind of the layer. These are the networks within that layer. And these are the outputs per network. Right. And yeah, there's a lot more to be dug in here, so I'll keep it at a high level. But again, I'll leave some time for Q&A. So please feel free to ask any questions here if you will be interested after. But so there are these kind of 4 buckets. On the social side, it's kind of that community layer. So how do we actually get humans to want to be together more, to dig into whatever's coming out of these intellectual layers, right? We're at SCURF, we're primarily concerned about the research. So how do we build community around research? How do we build communication layers around the research? How do we eventually create more learning pathways so that there's more people who could be researchers? How do we both ourselves provide funding for some of these activities, but also very importantly in the long run, how can we actually be kind of a research funding coordinator as a public good, right? Because a lot of what we're doing is exploring what are the series of public goods necessary to improve research ecosystems, to truly make them decentralized. And decentralized in the sense of the researchers really getting to be more of the decision makers of how funding goes and making sure they own all their IP and things in that direction. So, right now it's a very interesting funding landscape in Web3 in the research direction. I'm even leaving the last couple of weeks of the market aside, but there's still a lot of room for change and growth there. So we're just excited to see how we can collaborate with others and be part of that and co-fund opportunities around research. And very importantly, and one that I think that I'm very excited to explore in more detail, is sort of an operational layer as a public good. So what does that actually mean to produce frameworks and processes and dedicate project managers and all these things as a good for an ecosystem, not just for your organizational benefit, because the operational layer very rarely exists on that communal basis, with one great exception being, I guess, open source infrastructure, right? That's where kind of operational infrastructure was emergent. But to actually have top down of like, hey, we're structuring a thing and we're giving away to the space from a pure ops perspective, I would love to hear more examples if anyone is aware of them, because I have been struggling to find them. And so now I kind of want to talk a little bit about operationalizing one of these knowledge ecosystems, because for me, the operationalization of that collection of theoretical networks is what a DRC or a decentralized research center is meant to be. And so when you want to operationalize something like this, it's important to talk about the scale, what topic, who's doing it, the funding, and to bring together all of these various networks that I was just outlining above. And so let me give you an actual example, because all of this has just been theoretical so far. And this QR code, in case you're wondering, is to a DAO Research Hub, which is DAO Research Hub Telegram group, where we are slowly just capturing anything that's coming up out of this, because MetaGov, DAO Research Collective, and SCURF, we all came together at Global Governance Gathering to do a bit of a DAO therapy session and get pain points from folks in industry on DAOs and governance. And now we're talking to a few universities about potentially funding, postdocs and fellows. And we're talking to all of the existing research networks around DAOs and governance that we're aware of. And if you're, I don't know how much time y'all have spent across or in any of these three orgs, but we have a reasonable landscape of connections amongst active research and governance, And so, thinking, how do we actually bring all these together, support with more funding, and really support with that operations layer, including a new role that we're trying out called community cross-pollination. So what does it actually mean for someone to effectively transfer knowledge between communities, and what is the process of doing that? So the DAO Research Hub is the first of these decentralized research centers that SCURF is trying to work on. And we are initially seeding some of the very small level activity of just providing some operational support and maybe funding a few students. But the three of us are actually working, and have perfect timing with the markets, we're working on seeking some dedicated funding to actually build out a more robust inter-university research network that can be this kind of connective thread between all folks in industry who might want to give their data to researchers or collaborate with academic researchers, and how to have more universities collaborating on this, because we're definitely hearing a lot more academics starting to think about DAO research more formally. So it seems like now is almost the perfect time to start formalizing some of this. And if anyone will be at the Stanford Blockchain Conference or Blockchain of Science Conference, we're kind of finalizing details, but it looks like on September 1st, we're going to do a joint DAO event there. But anyway, let me just quickly wrap this up and open up to Q&A. So again, these kind of cross-domain knowledge network layer, that's what I've been defining in sort of a genericized way, what SCURF is trying to do, build all of these different components to it. And so that has really been our focus so far, is building that as the foundation. And so, we're actively doing this. This is our core bread and butter. This is our primary focus. But on top of that experiment, right, and these green areas are just areas where we're actively doing something. We're thinking about the landscape of changing publication, but we are, happy to delve into that more later, or if anyone has questions about it. But basically, we're just observing what's happening on the publication side, because for us, it's very important to have this kind of, regardless of whether or not you're publishing, we want there to be a network. And we want to say, regardless of whether or not you're pushing to a formal conference or journal, we want to make sure that people have some kind of apparatus to improve their research quality. So this is an experiment we're actively running. Happy to share more color about it. And if anyone's going to ETHCC, we'll be chatting a little more about what we're working on specifically there. But the thinking is, right, you have this cross-domain knowledge network layer as a foundation upon which there are going to be different versions. And I don't think there's going to be a single peer review structure or a single publication structure, right? These will both be their own landscapes. But we want this to be kind of a foundational consolidation layer across everything that's coming up on top. And that's where we're starting to build this DAO Research Hub, which again brings together all of those different network layers that I presented earlier for a knowledge ecosystem, and brings it together specifically for DAOs and governance. And so from the SCURF perspective, we're very excited to try to templatize the approach here, and what are all the things and the ingredients and steps that need to be taken and brought together to be able to build a decentralized research center in a single topic area. because SCURF is not just about governance and DAO research, we're about Web3 research. And so we want to then launch a security decentralized research center and a cryptography one, and keep doing this for every single core research domain area. So if anyone here is very excited by these ideas and you're active in any core research area of Web3, we don't want to be doing this alone, because we think the only way these decentralized research centers genuinely benefit the ecosystem is if all of the relevant players come together to build them out. So we are very excited to kind of be one of these conveners around research. And I already mentioned some of the elements of what is specific value add we're providing with the DAO Research Hub. These are all topics we're already thinking of for future decentralized research centers, and I will not be shocked if this list ends up expanding with time, but that's already more than enough for the next few years. And there's a tremendous amount of open questions around this, right? We're not pretending that we have figured out or solved the problem, or, our pathway is the one that solves research or fixes science, or, right? We're not going to be that braggadocious to think that is feasible alone. So there's a tremendous amount of open questions. Our big thinking is, how do we provide shared resources? How do we go about building all of this as a public good? None of what we're doing is intended to be monetized. We have no desire to launch tokens around any of this, because we really just want these to be open public goods. And so we don't know the answers to these questions yet, and we're very excited to work with more folks to figure out what this can actually look like. So if this is of interest to anyone, please feel free to reach out to myself. Fotis or Unipub, in the metagame community is also involved in SCURF. Feel free to reach out to him at any point if you have any questions. Just feel free to hit me up on Twitter, us at the SCURF level. This is our Discord. I want to make sure to leave at least, 7 minutes for questions. So I will stop there. And I don't know if would questions come in through chat, or is there any way I can see them, or do I have to hop in the Discord because I closed it out while I was presenting? All right, let me just quickly open up. So let me stop sharing for now. I'm happy to take questions. Sorry, I closed Discord while I was presenting.
No worry. So I really love what you're talking about. I think that the networks and kind of the information, the way you presented it, really gave me a lot of insight into basically how all DAOs work. I think even just the way that the decentralized network kind of compressed the 6 into 4, because kind of social kind of got compressed instead of some media learning became one and community. But I think having a place where the research and review can help to define and support like this knowledge ecosystem, will really help kind of define and get information out there. Can you talk a little bit more about like publication and like peer review structure and how that kind of fits into decentralized information?
Yeah, so the way we're approaching the peer review experiment that we're working on, right? Because because I made some assumptions of everyone being on the same page about it, given the time constrained presentation. So right, with something like peer review, what does peer review actually mean, and where does it exist? So the whole idea of peer review, and if anyone is really wants to go down a rabbit hole, Darren Zhu from atoms.org, he presented an awesome presentation at DeSci Berlin in late May on kind of the history of peer review, which just provides great color if you want to go down a rabbit hole there. But anyway, so basically, right, any publication, whether it's Nature or ACM or whatever else, right, what does publication mean? It's formal journals, formal academic journals, or it's formal academic conferences. And both of those have a peer review function attached to them. So I would actually argue that in the current landscape of science, at least in the United States, review and publication are actually a single network, because there is no one that just provides open review for anyone who wants it. You have your friends and colleagues who you can ask, but when you're ready, you apply to Conference X and they review your stuff. And why are they reviewing it? Because they effectively want to know, is your stuff up to par for their conference, right? Are they willing to pretty much standard editor, right? Like, are they willing to have their name associated with your work kind of thing? And if you look into the actual publishing industry and the specifics of their business model and everything else, a lot of red flags start coming up with the fact that no one is paid to do review. Everyone is pretty much paid by their university salaries. People are expected to contribute as a good. Scientists sometimes have to pay to get their stuff published, even though like they don't have an alternative function available to them. Just universities cover it if you're at a university. But yeah, it's a very interesting mess of a system that can be reasonably argued exists in its current form to keep existing in its current form, not for the actual betterment and advancement of science. And that's where, for us, we want to kind of see there's already an evolving landscape of publications. So there's informal publications. I know like the Talent DAO crew is trying to launch a journal of decentralized work. There's already a lot of cool stuff happening on the, hey, you have an idea, here's the formal endpoint of where you need to push it out, right? And Scurf's whole existence is, we don't care where you are on that publication journey. We're a place where you come hang out to talk research. Are you just starting it? Are you getting ready to publish? Did you already publish? We don't care. We want to just nerd out with anyone who wants to nerd out on core research topics. So that's kind of why we don't want to take a stab at any specific part of the publication landscape, is because we do not want to unintentionally kind of create judgments and push a certain idea top down that does not need to be there. We'd much rather try to have create the environment for some kind of emergent landscape to exist. So on the peer review side, what we're starting to do there, we have a whole peer review experiment that we're setting up. We have all of our documentation on GitHub, but the thinking there is, well, how do we actually start to pay people to review independent people's research that is not getting pushed to a formal conference or publication? Right? So someone that just says like, hey, I thought of an idea, and before I start engineering it for my DAO, what if I actually had a place to go check in and apply to be like, hey, can I just get feedback on this from people? And right, we are actually directly incentivizing. So for this first experiment, we're actually going to be paying 500 DAI per review for someone to go through, fully read a paper and provide some criticism to it, and do all, or not criticism, constructive feedback, excuse me, to hopefully help the paper advance. And we hope that doing it in this kind of open fashion will also slowly contribute to some of the existing trends in meta research and open science about just keeping science more transparent and accountable, and trying to align the incentives in a way where we all want to collaborate on the biggest problems, and not as much where we are kind of bottlenecked and focused on our existing incentives of publish or perish. And
yeah. When you get in, make sure to leave this room. All right?
All righty. So yeah, hopefully that answered that aspect of it. And I know we're just about hitting time, so I feel like that might be a good place to sign off. And yeah, if anyone else does have any other questions, yeah, please feel free to hop into our Discord, or you could find me on Twitter or Discord directly and DM me. I am in the I'm not active in metagame, but I am in that Discord, so feel free to find me in there. I'm just Eugene.
Can you give people your Twitter and the website or place that they should follow up?
Yeah, sure. So my Twitter is bbts1. I just dropped that in chat here, and let me know if there's a better place to drop it. That is my direct Discord, and I will quickly drop the invite link to the Scurf Discord. And great. Yeah, those are all links you can find me at.
Thank you. I will add these to the MetaFest general chat.
Perfect. Well, yeah, thank you so much for moderating the conversation, and thanks y'all for tuning in. Hopefully you're enjoying MetaFest, and yeah, have a wonderful rest of your Monday.
Thanks, Eugene. See you later.
Everyone.